Good evening. It's 8 p.m. here local time in Warsaw. I'm Diana Skaya, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is frustrated by Western silence on North Korean troops near the front lines. Now, although he continues to urge his allies for more aid to counter the effects of this North Korean presence, NATO remains wary of actions that could further escalate the conflict. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. The pro-European incumbent president in Moldova faces a pro-Moscow challenger amid fears of foreign meddling. France becomes the latest EU country to tighten its borders. As Spain faces deadly floods, political tensions rise over the crisis response. North Korean troops are due to enter combat in Ukraine in the coming days, say top U.S. officials. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has called on Western partners for more aid to help fend off Pyongyang's forces, but NATO members fear further escalation of the conflict. Our Franciszek Pilis has more.
Armed to the teeth, North Korean troops are making their way westward, marching to the beat of Russian war drums. According to U.S. officials, thousands of them are already near the Ukrainian border and getting ready to engage Kiev's forces.
We now assess that there are some 10,000 North Korean soldiers in total in Russia. And the most recent information indicates that as many as 8,000 of those North Korean forces have been deployed to the Kursk region. We've not yet seen these troops deploy into combat against Ukrainian forces, but we would expect that to happen in the coming days.
The cooperation between Russia and North Korea is at its peak, with the latter's foreign minister, Choi Son-hui, saying Pyongyang will support Moscow until its victory in Ukraine. While both sides of the war in Ukraine have received help from their allies, a move such as this is unprecedented. But, according to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, troops aren't the only North Koreans to be sent to Russia.
Apart from that, we know that there is an agreement in the making to transfer engineering troops as well as civilians, huge number of civilians from North Korea to work at various military plants in the Russian Federation.
The Ukrainian president has also criticized his Western allies, as well as China, for their, quote, silence following Pyongyang's move.
And then if nothing happens, and I believe that the reaction that is there today is nothing, it is zero, then the number of Korean soldiers will be increased on our soil.
Analysts say an equal response from NATO could further escalate the war, but Kiev holds a different view.
Many of our Western partners, including my own country, the United States, of which I'm so grateful to hold an American passport, we still don't understand that Russia is, for lack of a better term, all bark and no bite.
Following that same logic, Ukraine expects more help from its partners as well, calling on South Korea to step up its aid efforts in response to their northern neighbors' decision to side with Russia. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has also lashed out at Poland, asking for Polish MiG-29 fighter jets to be delivered to Ukraine. Given the aircraft's Soviet make, Ukrainian pilots would not have to go through training to make use of the jets. Warsaw, however, isn't keen on handing over the aircraft until it receives the F-35s it ordered, which are still being assembled in the United States, so as to not compromise the security of its own airspace. Ukraine's president has also called on Poland to shoot down Russian missiles over western Ukraine. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz said Poland has given Ukraine everything they had.
Poland has donated as much arms and equipment as it could have to Ukraine, but we will not compromise Poland's own security and defense capabilities. The decision to shoot down missiles is always one made by the whole of NATO, rather than just one member country. As of today, no such decision has been made.
With North Korean troops ready to pounce on Ukrainian soldiers at seemingly any moment, tensions between Kiev and its Western partners are rising, as Ukraine waits for its allies to decide their next move.
During his visit to Beijing, Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico said that he respects China's stance on the war in Ukraine. Now, the ties between the two countries have been elevated to what is now termed an official strategic partnership. Now, in a recent meeting, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico commended Chinese President Xi Jinping's just, objective, and constructive approach to what he termed the crisis in Ukraine. Now, this according to a report published by Chinese press agency Xinhua. Now, since returning to office, Fico has sought stronger ties beyond the EU, notably with China and Russia. Now, the partnership with China now allows Slovakians to enter visa-free for up to 15 days and includes other benefits as well. Chinese officials have also expressed hope that the EU, especially during its upcoming 2025 presidency, would engage more openly with Beijing, particularly as 2025 marks 50 years of partnership between the EU and Beijing. Now, Fico's visit is set to continue until November 5. Moldova is holding a runoff presidential election this Sunday. Now, incumbent pro-European President Maia Sandu will face off against Alexander Stoyango, who seeks to rebuild bridges with Moscow. Now, there are fears that the election could be marred by foreign interference, as instances of meddling were reported during the election's first round. Aromatic Steel has the story.
Moldova's path will be determined on Sunday when the country's residents vote in the presidential runoff.
The future is at stake. Either a pro-European future together alongside other countries, or a darker future, which I won't call pro-Russian, but which is something similar to that.
Less than 2 weeks ago, Moldova's pro-European leaders breathed a sigh of relief when a referendum to add EU membership to the constitution passed by a very slim majority. The vote was marred by foreign interference, OSCE observers reported. Sandu said criminal groups backed by foreign forces had tried to bribe 300,000 voters.
I'm blaming the criminal groups who are using the dirty money to buy the Moldovan votes.
The vote was held along a presidential election won by President Sandu. Her rival in the runoff is Alexandru Stoyanolo, who served as Moldova's prosecutor general until his suspension on charges of corruption and abuse of power pressed by the Sandu administration. He was acquitted of the charges by a Moldovan court, and last year he won a case against Moldova in the European Court of Human Rights. Stoyanolo is endorsed by the Party of Socialists. The party has been traditionally Russia-oriented, and up until recently it opposed EU integration. But then your party is often called as pro-Russian. Would you agree with this statement?
Party of Socialists is a pro-Moldovan party.
Moldova's links to Russia trace back to the Soviet period. The country was part of the Soviet Union up until the bloc's dissolution in 1991. Since then, the country has been stuck between East and West. Part of its territory, the breakaway province of Transnistria, is considered Moldovan territory occupied by Russia. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Chisinau took a strong turn toward EU integration. Along its neighbor Ukraine, Moldova was granted EU candidate status.
I hope that this window of opportunity that we have today will continue so that we can make most of it. We have started to, in a very accelerated pace, to move on various chapters, being economic integration, being political integration.
Moldovans will choose their president just a week after the parliamentary election in Georgia, another ex-Soviet country trying to join the EU. There, an increasingly pro-Russian ruling party claimed victory in a result contested by the opposition and international observers. The newest polls point towards a slim margin victory by pro-EU candidate Maia Sandu in Moldova, but crucial for the outcome may be votes cast in Transnistria and abroad.
France has reintroduced strict border controls. Now, what does this mean for the future of the Schengen zone? Our Sonia Agata Biszczan reports.
Effective November 1st, 2024, France reintroduced border controls with its 6 Schengen neighboring countries that will continue until at least April 30th, 2025. According to French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau, the introduction of these measures is due to serious threats to public order and domestic security posed by high-level terrorist activity.
In fact, since the terrorist attack that occurred in Paris in 2015, we have the re-establishment of border control of the borders of France with the neighborhood countries. So it's not a new information, it's only the prolongation of previous decisions that have been adopted and implemented since 2015.
Consequently, the measure has yet to elicit much response from the French public. The French decision comes amidst the backdrop of a number of EU countries reverting to stricter border control measures.
So France has been doing it. Germany recently reintroduced permanent border controls. The Dutch government has already announced wanting to reintroduce permanent border checks in November. So it's a little bit of a domino effect that seems to be happening.
We can see this because there is a general trend in Europe of far-right governments that are particularly opposed to migration and even mobility intra-European.
In September, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk expressed his concern when Germany decided to introduce stricter border controls.
Poland does not need to strengthen controls on our border, but rather strengthen the participation of countries such as Germany in guarding and securing the external borders of the European Union.
The trend of stricter border controls in the Schengen zone raises questions and concerns. However, temporary reintroduction of border control is in line with the Schengen Borders Code. Nevertheless, the current landscape does not inspire much confidence in the Schengen zone stability as countries now attempt to balance the competing priorities of national security and the principle of free movement.
Spain has been ravaged by recent flash floods, which have already claimed 205 lives. Now, many people continue to be missing, with more flooding anticipated. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez and opposition leaders are beginning to blame each other, exchanging accusations of mishandling the crisis.
Spain continues to fight against the deadly floods which swept through the country on Tuesday night. As the death toll continues to rise, many remain missing in the affected Valencia region. Over 1,700 soldiers and thousands of volunteers have come to the rescue of the worst affected areas. But many fear the crisis is not over yet. On Thursday afternoon, Prime Minister Sánchez urged Spaniards to remain vigilant against the turbulent weather changes.
Please stay at home, don't go out. Stay at home, listen to the recommendations from emergency services, because right now, the most important thing is to keep as many people safe as possible.
As the initial shock of the tragedy dies down, Spaniards are starting to look for an explanation. Prime Minister Sánchez is blaming the regional government led by the opposition People's Party. The local body reportedly sent out warning messages 8 hours after the floods were first reported. But Sanchez's neglect of the crisis remains a glaring reality.
In the following days and weeks, the Popular Party, the People's Party, will start to attack the government and show that it was not efficient. And they will start to lead to make a vote of no-confidence. It will be difficult, but because they need to collect 176 votes in the parliament. They have now with Vox Party and the Canarian Coalition 171, so they need 5 other deputies.
European leaders have offered their sympathies, declaring full-fledged support for the victims.
The rescue teams are working tirelessly to bring as many as possible to safety, and Europe is ready to help. We have activated our Copernicus satellite system to help coordinate the rescue teams. And we have already offered to activate our civil protection mechanism.
These are the deadliest floods that Spain has seen in 30 years. For many, the chaos echoes the images of the not-so-distant past when a similar-scale tragic flood affected much of Central and Eastern Europe. Experts warn that such cataclysmic weather events may become more common as a consequence of climate change.
Every year on the 1st of November, Poles head en masse to cemeteries across the country to pay respect to their departed family members. Now, rooted in history and tradition, All Saints' Day transforms graveyards into seas of light as people place candles in memory of the dead. Now, this year is no different. Our reporter Alex Sumlinsky is at Powązki Cemetery in Warsaw, and we're going to go live to her right now. Good evening, Alex. Walk us through a little bit of what you've been seeing this evening.
Good evening, Diana. Well, I am at Powązki Cemetery, which is one of the largest and oldest cemeteries here in Warsaw. Now, it is also known as the National Necropolis because this is where great Poles have been laid to rest. For example, Stefan Starzyński, who was the mayor of Warsaw prior to the outbreak of World War II, but also Władysław Reymont, the Nobel Prize laureate for his work on the peasants. Now, this year also marks 50 years for a special fundraiser which is carried out for the conservation of graves and tombstones here. You have to keep in mind that this cemetery is over 230 years old. And now I spoke to some people who have come here today to Powązki Cemetery. So let's take a listen as to what they have told me.
It's really unique to see all the graves, to see all the lights and how Polish people are united this day, and they are really coming here, and with all this respect for the ancestors, they are coming the whole day.
It's really magic. This is the first time I go to a cemetery at night, like from different culture. We don't go to cemeteries at night, but it's quite good, quite nice. I like it.
Now, over the 50 years that this fundraiser has been running, conservators have worked on some 1,700 tombstones. Now, this year's fundraiser runs all the way until November 3rd, so if you are in Warsaw, make sure to stop by the Powązki Cemetery. And this year's funds will be used to renovate 10 tombstones in the oldest part of this cemetery. And now I'll leave you with a piece which is dedicated to this holiday. Some of those who passed away in 2024 are Canadian actor Donald Sutherland.
Good evening, Professor Dumbledore.
Maggie Smith, a British actress known for her roles in productions such as the Harry Potter film series, where she played Professor Minerva McGonagall. Polish actor Jerzy Sztur, one of Poland's greatest actors and an icon of Polish cinema. He also worked as a screenwriter, film director, voice actor, and drama professor. Those who grew up in the 1990s can't forget the voice of the Lion King's Mufasa, voiced by James Earl Jones. Jan Andrzej Paweł Kaczmarek was a Polish composer who wrote scores for more than 70 feature films and documentaries, including Finding Neverland, for which he won an Oscar.
Hey, hello! No, friend!
Janusz Rewiński, actor and satirist, known for his many roles, including that of Siara in the Killer movie franchise.
Buenos dias, Señor Siara. Buenos Aires!
American psychologist and professor Philip Zimbardo also passed away in 2024. He was best known for his infamous 1971 Stanford prison experiment, but went on to become one of the most valued contemporary psychology academics. Maxim Krystof was a Ukrainian poet, volunteer, and soldier. He was also a junior sergeant of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, killed in battle. Ukrainian journalist Viktoria Roshtyna was captured by the Russians while preparing a report on the life of residents in the areas of occupied Ukraine. Roshtyna was set to return to Ukraine as part of one of the prisoner exchanges. She never will. Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, lawyer, anti-corruption activist, and political prisoner, also passed. Recognized by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience, he was awarded the Sakharov Prize for his work on human rights.
I am confident and declare that they are not the masters of our country and will never be. And a huge number of people, tens of millions of people, agree with me, and we will never allow these people to seize and steal our country.
And finally, Agata Szostkowska-Stanisławska, our former colleague at TVP World, who worked with Polish national television for 33 years during her professional life. Agata was a newsroom editor, director, translator, and screenwriter.
And now back to our main story this evening. A critical escalation in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is becoming increasingly possible as reports confirm that thousands of North Korean troops are on the brink of entering the war in support of Russian forces. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has called for more aid from his Western allies. He's warning of the strategic threat that these new forces pose. But meanwhile, NATO members are closely monitoring the situation and they're concerned about the potential for even further escalation. Now, joining me now to discuss the broader implications of this new development is Peter Dickinson, chief editor of Business Ukraine magazine. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for being with us here on TVP World this evening.
Good evening.
So let's take it from the beginning now. So North Korean troops are due to enter combat in Ukraine in the coming days. Now, this is what some top U.S. officials have said. Meanwhile, Ukraine's president has called on Western partners for more aid to help fend off Pyongyang's forces. And NATO members, of course, fear the escalation of the conflict. What is your take on this? What does North Korea's involvement actually indicate about Russia's current military status and its alliances?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, the arrival of North Korean troops is a major landmark in this war. At this point, we're talking about approximately 10,000 troops who may be already in process being trained, some of whom have already been brought to the prefrontal positions, may soon be in battle. But there's a sense that this is just the beginning. Essentially, Putin is testing the West by bringing these foreign troops quite openly into the war. Putin is testing what the Western reaction will be. And the assumption has to be that if the West does not react strongly, we're going to see a lot more troops. The 10,000 will just be the start, and we'll see a lot more North Korean soldiers. North Korea has a vast army. They're not at war at the moment. These troops are potentially available, so to speak. So there's a very real danger here that what we're seeing now is just the beginning of a much bigger process, with Putin looking to bolster his forces. Now, that has huge implications geopolitically. Not least, these troops will become battle-hardened, and then they will be available to North Korea, perhaps for other theatres, let's say. That's one obvious implication. There's also a danger that this could become a new strategy for Russia. Russia could use these troops for other aggressive actions in the region. It would significantly bolster Russia's potential if they're able to integrate these troops. Now, why is Russia doing this? I think we need to look from a practical point of view at the realities of the Russian army in Ukraine. Russia is suffering very, very heavy losses in Ukraine. They are advancing at the moment, but they are suffering significant losses. And Putin is very reluctant to order a new mobilization in Russia. The last one he did in September 2022 was politically very unpopular. It was risky. He doesn't want to do it again. So now he's found an alternative to bring in these troops from North Korea. But the geopolitical implications of that are much broader than the war that's currently taking place in Ukraine and could be global in context.
Right. So now you walked us through a little bit about the impact on the dynamics of this conflict and what would happen if these North Korean troops really get into this Ukrainian front. But now, what is NATO's concern regarding this development, and how is it preparing to respond to this?
Well, this is the big question now. We've had reports for more than 2 weeks that North Korean troops are being deployed. They are being prepared. The decision has been made. And so far, from NATO capitals, from America and other NATO capitals, we've not seen a really concerted response. There is a sense, on the contrary, that NATO leaders really don't know how to respond to this. They don't know what to do. There's been a lot of condemnation, there's been diplomatic moves, but there's been no real steps.
Why is that? Why aren't we, having through concrete steps? I mean, NATO has seen what Russia has done, what it's been doing. Why isn't there a plan, some sort of plan being unfolded here?
That's a very good question. I fear, it may sound cynical, but the only conclusion that I can draw is they don't know what to do. They don't know how to respond. The only real significant response, the only realistic and practical response that I can see and that most analysts have put forward would be to significantly increase aid to Ukraine. There's no point in talking about sanctions on North Korea. North Korea is already the most sanctioned country. Russia is also one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. Clearly, sanctions are not having the desired effect. So what we're looking at is some sort of a military response. Now, NATO is not going to engage directly in the war at this point. There have been some members of NATO who have said that we shouldn't rule out some sort of a troop deployment, but the general consensus is that's not going to happen. So all you're really left with is the possibility of increasing military aid significantly to Ukraine. We've not seen any big steps in that direction. There's just been news this evening of a new American military package, but it's pretty much of a standard that we've seen many, many times before. It's certainly not a step up in terms of the quantities and the types of weapons that are being provided. The other big thing that we do, of course, is to allow Ukraine to shoot targets inside Russia, which has been a big point of contention.
Right. I just wanted to ask you if you can go a little bit more detail about what the U.S. is planning, how the U.S. is planning to counter this new layer of support for Russia. I mean, you're talking about a military package, but I mean, we're just days away from a presidential election. What can you tell us on that?
Yes, well, no, the package that was announced tonight was a fairly routine affair. It's of course, all such aid packages are very welcome, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. I don't think we'll see any significant American position or any new strategies or any changes in position in America until the election next week, and perhaps for some time after that, as the dust settles, as it were. So no, and what we've seen in the last week or so, since the story first emerged of North Korean troops, has been the absence of a response. So clearly there is no position in the White House, or they maybe feel before the elections they don't want to make a big issue of this. They certainly don't want to be going around talking a lot in public about the fact that the war in Ukraine is escalating and Russia is doing the escalating, because the West, and America in particular, has been playing a game of de-escalation, or so-called escalation management, throughout the war, and it looks pretty clear now that that is backfiring quite badly.
You mentioned about, of course, Ukraine being allowed to use those missiles. Now, let me ask you this. If Poland were granted authority to intercept missiles over Ukraine, how would this impact the current NATO strategy along its eastern borders?
Well, the big danger, of course, from a NATO point of view, is that it would somehow drag NATO into the war, that Russia would have more of an excuse, let's say, to actually strike targets in Poland, the air defense systems themselves that were in Poland. The Russians could potentially say, look, these systems are now directly participating in the war. They're hitting our military, our missiles, our military assets. Therefore, we have the right to strike them. Now, a lot of people, I would be one of them, would say that's not going to happen. Russia would not do that. They would not strike NATO territory on that basis. But it does open up that possibility, which is why we have this great reluctance from the side of NATO. And that fits in the bigger pattern. We've had this throughout the war, not want to get directly involved. So that would be the main reason why they'd hold.
We're just having a technical issue there for a moment. We have lost our guest talking on Ukraine. We'll just give it a moment. Okay, and we've lost our guest. Well, that's all for this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay with us for more throughout this evening. Have a good night.